Hello, everybody, and welcome to the city's open house for the zoning bylaw review. We are pleased to host this virtual open house to discuss draft amendments for the zoning bylaw review. There will be 4 planning staff hosting this open house today, and we will briefly introduce ourselves as we speak throughout the presentation. My name is Emma, and I'll be starting off the presentation today. We're going to start off with a land acknowledgement. I want to thank everyone for their time in joining us today. I'd like to acknowledge that we're on the traditional unceded territories of the Semiahmoo First Nation and the broader territory of the Coast Salish peoples. Let us take a moment to offer gratitude to the Semiahmoo and Coast Salish peoples for the care and stewardship of these lands that the city of White Rock sits on. As visitors on this land, we have a responsibility to acknowledge the grounds in which we are privileged to live, work, and play. Here's an outline of what we have planned for today. We anticipate that the presentation will be roughly 30 minutes. We're going to start off with a quick introduction to the zoning bylaw review and discuss how we will be moving forward in the coming months. We will then get into the topics, which includes accessory uses, amenity space requirements, landscaped open space, and the scale of housing in mature neighborhoods. Topics are followed by a Q&A session. The presentation will provide a brief overview of the draft amendments, and we anticipate that we will get into more detail when we get to the question and answer section. As we go through the presentation, feel free to send in your questions to the Q&A tab on the top right-hand side of the screen. The questions will be published and answered during the Q&A session after the presentation. We would like to invite anybody to ask questions on any of the topics discussed today, but please be aware that we will not tolerate any inappropriate comments. If any of the comments or questions are inappropriate or offensive, we will not be publishing them. Please remain respectful and focus your questions on the topics relating to the zoning bylaw review. At the end of the presentation, we invite you to fill out a feedback form. This feedback form will be posted on the Talk White Rock webpage, which is the city's online engagement platform. The presentation does not cover all the topics included in the zoning bylaw review, and you will have the opportunity to indicate on the feedback form whether you would like to see future engagement sessions on other topics, as well as questions pertaining to the scale of housing in single-family zones. So the zoning bylaw is important because it implements the broader visions of the official community plan and influences the built form of the city. It regulates how land, buildings, and structures can be used, where they can be placed on a property, and how tall they can be. The zoning bylaw can play a really important role in attaining the goals listed in the official community plan, like sustainable development, diversity of housing choices, and community character. One of the primary motivations for the zoning bylaw review are the Council's 2018 to 2022 strategic priorities, which include accessory vacation rentals regulation, waterfront commercial zones, coach houses and secondary suites in duplexes and triplexes, as well as single-family zoning. The topics chosen for the review were based on these strategic priorities, and other topics were included to address concerns from staff with experience implementing the zoning bylaw. So here's a brief outline of the direction that we're planning to take moving forward with the zoning bylaw review. After today's session, we plan on potentially hosting an additional engagement session. Our decision to move forward with this will largely be based on responses from the feedback forms from today's open house. At the end of the session, we'll have a link to the feedback form, which is located on the zoning section of the Talk White Rock webpage. We anticipate that a draft bylaw for council will be put forth for first and second reading after the additional engagement session, and then the process will move on to the final approval of the bylaw and implementation. Now we're going to move on to our first topic for the presentation, which are accessory uses, and this includes secondary suites, home occupation, bed and breakfasts, coach houses, and short-term rentals. Now I'll pass it off to my colleague, Neetu.
Hello, everybody. My name is Neetu, and I will be discussing the topic of accessory uses, starting off with secondary suites. So the key reasons for these changes include more freedom for homeowners who want a mortgage helper. Housing is expensive, and allowing homeowners to rent out spaces in their home would provide additional income to support monthly mortgage payments. Another reason is providing people with the opportunity to bring in a monthly income from renting out secondary suites, which improves the affordability of housing. Allowing more secondary suites would also support the rental housing market by expanding opportunities for rental suites. The amendments would support multi-generational living and aging in place by providing rental accommodation for seniors wanting to downsize and for people wishing to rent out spaces in their home to family members. In the zoning bylaw with changes made to the BC Building Code, in 2019, which expand permissions for secondary suites. So the draft changes for secondary suites largely align with the updates to the BC Building Code, as I mentioned previously. The image at the bottom of the slide depicts the major changes that were made, which include the ability to construct new secondary suites in more types of houses like duplexes, triplexes, and townhouses, where previously they were only allowed in single-family homes. Size restrictions for these suites have also been removed. The City of White Rock has proposed amendments to align with these changes. For example, now secondary suites could be permitted in duplexes, triplexes, and townhouses. Further to this, the provision which restricted the size of secondary suites to 90 square meters has been removed and replaced with a standard which limits the suite to 40% of the size of the principal building it is situated in. This was added to ensure that the secondary suite still stays smaller than the principal building. Previously, the city had placed restrictive covenants on new developments which were not permitted to have secondary suites. The city is now looking to allow secondary suites more broadly as part of the draft changes to the zoning bylaw. Requirements for off-street parking has not changed and will remain at one parking space per secondary suite to prevent any additional concerns related to traffic and on-street parking. Other topics in the accessory uses section include home occupation, bed and breakfasts, short-term rentals, and coach houses. So home occupation was a topic of interest for staff because of changes to working patterns throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. Staff saw an increase in applications for home-based businesses, and in some cases for more than one in a home. Draft changes seek to allow more than one business in a home, with the current zoning standards restricts it to one business per household. A standard has also been added to enable the establishment of home businesses in secondary suites and requires that the operator of the business is a primary resident of the secondary suite. For bed and breakfasts, the draft changes are related to simplifying language and removing any reference to standards, which are addressed in other municipal processes like the business license process. A standard has been introduced to ensure that the operator of the bed and breakfast is either the owner or immediate family member of the home and is also a full-time resident of the home. This ensures that the operator has ties to the local community and maintains the traditional use of a bed and breakfast. No additional standards have been proposed for short-term rentals and coach houses. Staff reviewed standards in other cities in the Metro Vancouver area, and the current standards in the zoning bylaw largely align with the standards in neighboring municipalities. Some provisions for short-term rentals and coach houses are proposed to be removed as they are already accounted for in other municipal processes within the city. Now I'm going to be talking about amenity space requirements. Currently, the zoning bylaw has no standards which require amenity spaces in multi-unit residential buildings like apartments and townhouses. So what is an amenity space? It's basically spaces which are used for recreation, which are recreational areas provided in multi-unit residential buildings like apartments or townhouses. Amenity areas can either be indoors or outside, open to all residents of a building, or restricted to residents of a specific unit. For example, amenities like communal swimming pools, meeting rooms, and dining areas, which are indoors and open to all residents, are known as common indoor amenity spaces. Outdoor common amenity spaces could include community gardens or recreational spaces like a swimming pool. They are open to anyone in the building and are situated outside. Outdoor private amenity space could include landscaped areas, patios, or deck, which are reserved for the use of someone in a specific residential unit. So one of the primary reasons why staff incorporated these draft amendments is due to the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic and the value that people place on access to nearby amenities. Amenities are particularly important, especially for dense urban environments, because they tend to foster greater social connection, which can improve mental health and quality of life. Draft amendments seek to improve the livability of new apartment developments by incorporating outdoor common amenities and indoor common amenity areas to encourage social connection and a sense of community. Similarly, in townhouse developments, outdoor common amenities and private outdoor amenity areas ensure residents have private outdoor areas for children and families and helps to encourage a sense of community among residents. Another key amendment that is proposed is the exclusion of indoor common amenity spaces from the calculation of gross floor area or density in secured rental tenure developments. This would ensure that secured rental tenure buildings do not have to sacrifice rental units in exchange for amenity space. This draft standard would reduce potential barriers to rental housing development. So this is an example of draft changes proposed to incorporate amenity spaces in new apartment developments in the zoning bylaw. These amendments would apply to apartment buildings with 10 or more dwelling units at a supply rate of 6 square meters per dwelling unit. This means if an apartment building has 20 dwelling units, then they would have to provide a total of 120 square meters of indoor or outdoor common amenity area. As per point 1B and C on the slide, if outdoor common amenity space or indoor common amenity areas are provided, it must be available to all residents, have no dimension less than 6 meters, and be designed so that the length does not exceed 4 times the width. These design standards would ensure that the amenity space is functional and can reasonably accommodate recreational activities. Now I'm going to pass it back to my colleague Emma, who's going to discuss our next topic, which is landscaped open space. Staff focused on this topic as part of Council's strategic priorities to review single-family home zones. As we were reviewing other municipal policies in the Lower Mainland, we noticed that many municipalities incorporated minimum landscaping standards, whereas White Rock currently has no landscaping standards.
Thanks, Neetu. Draft standards for landscaped open space can encourage many community benefits, such as encouraging the natural filtration of water through the ground, which reduces surface water pollution. This would be accomplished by requiring landscaping with permeable materials like live plant material on portions of residential properties. Landscaping can encourage tree retention and in turn reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Front yard landscaping can beautify the streetscape, and this would be achieved by requiring that 50% of the front yard is landscaped. And lastly, encouraging the use of landscaping with live plant material encourages the provision of habitat for local wildlife and pollinators. Landscaped open space standards typically place a restriction on the amount of a lot which can be covered by hard surfaces such as grouted stone or concrete. This is usually expressed as a percentage of the lot area. And over half of municipalities we sampled in our review of municipalities in the Lower Mainland currently use landscaped open space standards. Draft amendments have been proposed which use the various terms you see here on the slide. For example, impermeable surfaces would mean any constructed area which does not allow for water to penetrate directly into the soil, such as concrete or asphalt. Permeable surface means areas which allow water to penetrate into the soil and can include live plants like grass or other materials like bark mulch and river rock. Live plant material is any live plant that is planted directly into the ground. To determine the maximum amount of impermeable surfaces that should cover a lot, We did some scenario testing. So for example, here we have a lot in the RS1 zone at 465 square meters. First, if you were to build out to maximize the setbacks in this zone, you would get a home of roughly 180 square meters. Then you could have a front projection, like an overhang at the front of the home. You could have a deck projecting from the rear of the home. You could have a driveway and likely a front walkway, and an accessory building like a shed in the backyard. And then what we have seen in the past are homes which then pave around a significant proportion of the property, leaving little space for trees, plants, and landscaped areas. In this example for the RS1 zone, there's roughly 35% of the property which is open for landscaped areas, which aligns with the draft standard, which would require that a minimum of 30% of the lot is covered with permeable material. This is another example showing a property in the RS2 zone with a lot area of 372 square meters. If you were to build out to maximize the setbacks in this zone, you would get a home of roughly 182.4 square meters. Then you could have a projection like an overhang at the front of the home. You could have a deck projecting from the rear of the home. You would definitely have a driveway and a front walkway, and an accessory building like a shed in the backyard. Again, we have seen in the past that homes will cover a large proportion of their property with surfaces like concrete, leaving little space for the natural filtration of water into the ground. In this case, for the RS2 zone, there's roughly 29% of the property which could be open for landscaped areas. And this aligns with the draft standard, which would allow a maximum 80% of the property to be covered with impermeable surfaces, with the remaining 20% which must be permeable. So as you can see with both of these examples, there's still some leeway to integrate other impermeable elements on the property that we may not have taken account for, so that the standards could be reasonably attained in new housing developments. Okay, now I'm going to pass it off to my colleague Jordan to introduce this slide.
Thanks, Emma. Hello, my name is Jordan, and we created this scenario to illustrate the impacts of minimum landscaping standards on an RS1 zoned lot. As you can see, one model represents proposed landscaping standards, and the other model represents no landscaping standards, or the status quo. There are some key things to note here. In the proposed landscaping standards model, the side yard area and the front porch area utilize river rock, which is an example of a permeable material. The no landscaping standards model has pavement in the side yard area and the front walkway, and a large grouted stone patio in the backyard. These are examples of non-permeable materials. Using the current standards in the zoning bylaw, a property owner could potentially pave over their entire lot with concrete or asphalt. With the new proposed landscaping standards, this would not be permitted on an RS1 zone lot, and a minimum of 30% of the lot would have to be landscaped with permeable materials. Now I will pass it back to Emma, who will continue with the next slide.
Okay, now I'm going to discuss our next topic, which is the scale of housing in single-family home zones. Staff focused on this topic as part of Council's strategic priority to review single-family home zones. In addition to this, the section of the Zoning Bylaw review intends on implementing Council's objective to guide land use decisions to reflect the vision of the community. Some of the key reasons as to why reductions in the scale of residential housing are being explored include concerns over what residents call the monster home dilemma. This is an issue whereby new housing development does not suit the existing character of residential areas in a neighborhood. This issue is present throughout the Lower Mainland in BC, which can be addressed using the alternative options presented today, such as reducing floor area ratio, otherwise known as FAR. Further to this, we will discuss density bonuses for use of the BC Energy Step Code, improving energy efficiency of new housing developments by providing bonuses for Energy Step Code compliance would provide numerous economic and environmental benefits to homeowners, such as monthly savings on energy costs and reducing greenhouse gas emissions from the use of green building methods. This would also make steps towards achieving Council's objective to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Encouraging the development of secondary suites and coach houses, also known as accessory dwelling units, through the use of FAR bonuses would support the rental housing market and address council priorities to address housing needs in White Rock. Single-family zones are also known as mature neighborhoods in the official community plan. The majority of land in White Rock is dedicated to this land use area, with mature neighborhoods representing the vast gray areas on this land use map on the top of the slide. These land use areas are characterized by low-scale residential development for single-family homes, as well as gentle infill development for duplexes and triplexes. The draft amendments that we will be discussing on the preceding slides are alternative approaches to reducing the scale of residential homes. These approaches require further public comment, and a link to the feedback form will be provided at the end of the open house so that you can tell us your views on the scale of homes in mature neighborhoods in White Rock. Engagement sessions for the development of the 2017 official community plan revealed repeated concerns from residents regarding the scale of residential homes. Mention of monster homes was common. For example, residents noted that we need to define the character of housing to be built. There are too many monster homes. Residents noted the loss of neighborhood character for monster houses and that monster homes don't fit neighborhood character. These are just a few examples of the statements provided by residents for the development of the current OCP. An approach to addressing what is called the monster home dilemma is to reduce the scale of residential homes, which is controlled by floor area ratio, or FAR. FAR is the ratio of a building's total floor area relative to the size of a lot. So for example, if a lot is 500 square meters and the FAR is 0.5, you would multiply 500 by 0.5 to get the total allowable floor area for the home on the lot. In this case, the home could be 250 square meters. Certain areas in a home are not included in the calculation of FAR, such as basements and garages, carports. So you could accommodate a much larger home than 250 square meters on this property if you would account for all the space not included in the calculation of FAR. The first alternative approach to addressing FAR is the scaled approach. This approach is used in West Vancouver for all of their single-family home zones. For this approach, if the lot is greater than 677 square meters or 7,287 square feet, then the FAR is 0.35. If the lot area is between 474 and 677 square meters, then the total size of the home can be 237 square meters, or 2,551 square feet. If the lot area is less than 474 square meters, the FAR would remain at 0.5. It's also important to note that in the past few months, West Vancouver's council has approved further reductions in FAR for the larger size lots from 0.35 to 0.30. This draft standard would be most impactful in the RS1 zone, which currently has an FAR of 0.5. The majority of lots in the RS1 zone are more than 677 square meters, as seen in this table. A total of 1,243 lots could have their FAR reduced from 0.5 to 0.35. Reducing the FAR in the RS1 zone from 0.5 to 0.35 would result in a home that is about 30% smaller for lots larger than 677 square meters. As you can see in the table near the bottom of the slide, the impacts of reducing FAR on a lot that is 7,534 square feet, or about 699 square meters, would result in a home that is 30% smaller than if the FAR were to remain at 0.5. Additionally, another reason why focusing on FAR reductions in the RS1 zone may be preferable to, say, the RS2 or RS3 zone is because many of these lots are situated on steep hillsides and narrower and smaller. Generally, the smaller the lot size, the greater the FAR to permit a reasonably sized home, and reducing FAR in these areas may have too great of an impact on future redevelopment. Okay, now I'll pass it off to Jordan again to describe this model on the slide.
Thank you, Emma. So this scenario was created based on the provisions of an RS1 zone, and Both models consist of a lot size of 677 square meters. The models also take into consideration additional zone provisions such as minimum setback requirements, maximum floor area, and maximum lot coverage. One model represents existing FAR standards, which consists of a building with an FAR of 0.5. The other model represents a proposed FAR reduction to 0.35 FAR using a similar building style. As you can see, the proposed FAR reduction model represents a smaller building that looks more modest in scale compared to the existing FAR standards model. This scenario illustrates a reduced building depth, which may be more visually appealing for residents in neighboring properties. However, a reduced building width could also be incorporated with the same proposed FAR reduction, resulting in a slimmer building visible from the street. Now I will pass it along to Emma, who will continue with the next slide.
Something to consider if we were to reduce floor area in residential zones is the impacts on the rental housing market. If floor area is reduced, homeowners may decide not to construct a secondary suite or a coach house due to reductions in living space. A way to combat this is through density bonuses, and this is an approach used in West Vancouver as well. For example, a 0.05 FAR bonus for up to 500 square feet could be provided for the construction of a registered secondary suite. Similarly, a 0.1 FAR bonus up to 800 square feet could be provided for homeowners who wish to construct a coach house. The image on the slide depicts the impacts of a 500 square foot bonus for a secondary suite. The orange area below the deck shows the space that would be provided as a bonus to allow for the construction of a secondary suite. This model was produced by West Vancouver's Neighbourhood Character Working Group in their report detailing the recommendations for zoning bylaw amendments to address their monster home problem. Another potential approach that could be implemented to reduce the scale of homes in mature neighborhoods is the inclusions of portions of garages in floor area. Currently, the zoning bylaw excludes all of the garage from the calculation of floor area, even though the garage does add massing to the home. Including portions of the garage in FAR is an approach taken by other municipalities in Metro Vancouver like New Westminster. In this case, draft amendments propose to include any floor space in the garage above 450 square feet in the calculation of floor area ratio, which is the area needed to accommodate a two-car garage. So any space beyond 450 square feet would be included in the calculation of FAR. Further to this, portions of balconies, porches, and covered decks could also be included in the calculation of floor area ratio. Currently, the zoning bylaw exempts all of these spaces, even though they do contribute to the massing of the building. We've also received complaints from various individuals who have noticed that in some circumstances, unenclosed balconies are being enclosed after building permits have been issued to illegally add additional floor area to homes. This standard could address the issue by automatically including any portion of a balcony, porch, or covered deck which exceeds 10% the size of the home in the calculation of FAR. And this is also an approach taken by numerous other municipalities in Metro Vancouver to control the massing of residential homes. Okay, now I'll pass it off to Jordan again to describe the model in this video.
Thank you, Emma. So here's a scenario that shows two models with large but equal size balconies. One model has a covered balcony, much like the type you would see throughout White Rock, and the other model does not have a covered balcony. In this alternative approach, the proposed changes would include any portion of a balcony which exceeds 10% of the residential gross floor area of the home in the total permissible square footage allowed on a lot. As you can see in the video, the covered balcony model adds quite a bit of massing to the building, which is why we thought that this alternative approach would be a great way of addressing the scale of homes in single-family zones. Now I will pass it back to Emma, who will continue with the next slide.
Did you know that some cities in Metro Vancouver provide bonuses for FAR for energy step code compliance, similar to FAR bonuses for secondary suites and coach houses, providing a bonus for the implementation of the various levels of the BC Energy Step Code would help to incentivize green building methods. This would be particularly impactful for residential homes as green building standards such as the Energy Step Code require thicker insulation, which further takes away from livable space in the home. By providing this small bonus for FAR, people are able to construct green homes without reductions to their living area. So for example, in New Westminster, residents can get a 0.01 FAR bonus if the building meets Energy Step Code 3, a 0.03 FAR bonus if the building meets Energy Step Code 4, and a 0.05 FAR bonus if the building meets Energy Step Code 5 or Passive House Design. The benefits to encouraging green building standards include improvements to energy efficiency and reduction in monthly costs, and a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, which mitigates the impacts of climate change. Further to the topics presented today, there are other key issues that have formed part of the zoning bylaw review as outlined in the table on the screen. This includes electric vehicle charging infrastructure to increase the supply of charging stations in single-family homes, multi-unit residential homes, and commercial buildings. A bylaw was passed earlier this year to amend the OCP, and zoning bylaw standards for building height need to be updated for the CR3 and CR4 zones in the waterfront village area to comply with these OCP amendments. Multi-unit residential parking was a topic for review and includes a proposed decrease in parking requirements for multi-unit residential buildings like apartments near public transit infrastructure near the town center. Off-street loading has been reviewed to improve functionality and design requirements, and short-term bicycle parking standards have been reviewed to improve design, functionality, and safety for short-term bicycle parking in White Rock. So this brings us to the end of the presentation section of the event. As a quick reminder, this is how we envision the zoning bylaw review moving forward. The open house event will be recorded for anyone to view and will be posted to the city's YouTube page and website for anyone who wasn't able to make it today. So we have a link provided on this screen to access the feedback form, which reads www.talkwhiterock.ca/zoning. Please see this webpage after the Q&A session to access the feedback form, which asks questions pertaining to the scale of homes in single-family zones, as well as potential future engagement events. Alternatively, you could also email the planning department at planning@whiterockcity.ca about any questions regarding the zoning bylaw review. At this time, I invite you to ask any questions pertaining to the topics discussed today, and I'll now pass it off to Greg to facilitate the Q&A.
Thanks, Emma, and good evening, everyone. Yeah, so hopefully you can see on the top right of your screen a little Q&A bubble. It looks like our cartoon caption bubble with a question mark in it. So if you want to click on that, and you're welcome to submit any questions or comments that you would like. I've been dismissing a number of comments from someone that's trolling the meeting and offering some very disrespectful feedback. So we will not publish things that are not respectful. But we went through that at a fairly high level. So if anyone has any questions or would like us to go through content again, please feel free to provide us with your feedback and we'll do that. Also, I would say it's 6 o'clock now. We're here until 7 o'clock. We're trying to monitor the attendees numbers, but we don't know if people are coming and going. So if you were not able to get here in time to catch the presentation, and perhaps after we give a bit of time to Q&A, if you'd like us to go through the presentation again, I suspect we may have time to do that. So with that, I'm going to just stop talking and we'll wait to see if we get any questions or comments. And as we do, we'll go through them. And as I say, if anyone would like us to go through the content again, we're happy to do that. maybe what I'll do, team, while we wait for our first couple questions here, I'm just going to share my screen. I just want to introduce our audience to the Talk White Rock platform. So if you have a chance, we've shown on the screen there the link to the project webpage. It's www.talkwhiterock.ca/zoning. What we've done is all the content that we've presented tonight is available through what we're calling these key issue summaries. So if you look at the documents section of the page here, you'll be able to sort of access these PDFs, which provide an overview of some of the draft zoning bylaw amendments that we're evaluating. And as Emma mentioned, we have this digital feedback form. There's a link to the form on the web page. So if you'd like to provide some feedback, perhaps you have a chance later to look at the key issue summaries, complete a form, and we're happy to include a review of your feedback as we move things forward. So I do see a few questions coming in here now. So maybe what I'll do is if you want to reshare the main presentation, and we'll use that as the platform to answer these questions.
Sure, Greg, I'm just going to share my screen again.
Yeah. Okay, so the first question, I'll put it out to the team. Whoever would like to answer it is, are heights going to be increased in single family zones? And Neetu, I'll let you reshare your screen there. So the short answer is no. And I think this was mentioned at the very beginning of the presentation as to why we're doing this, but council's directed staff to look at a series of topics like secondary suites and short-term rentals, and then single-family zoning. And so within the single-family zoning, the majority of our focus has been given to the massing of buildings, but not looking at any proposed changes to the maximum heights that are permitted. So right now, most of our single-family lot zones accommodate maximum height of 7.7 meters, and we're not looking to change that through this. And I do see that someone would like us to go through the content again. So for that, the person that posed that question or comment, we'll probably go through questions and comments for the next 15 or so minutes. If they start to slow down, then we'll certainly go through the material again sooner, but in 15 or so minutes, we'll go back through the presentation again. I think we'll have time to do that. John mentions, thanks for the excellent presentation. Appreciate all the proposed changes and hope that they can be implemented. In terms of changes to housing in mature neighborhood areas, is it the case that the majority of redevelopment that we see on the hillside has been at 0.5 FAR? Some homes look larger. So John, we're just going to grab some data for you, and just bear with us for 1 second.
Yeah, so to answer your question, John, the majority of homes on the hillside are zoned RS2 and RS3. The RS2 zone has an FAR of 0.6, and the RS3 zone has an FAR of 0.7 times the lot area. So they do look a little bit larger because basement area isn't included in the calculation of FAR. So because their first 1 to 2 stories are built into the hillside, they appear a bit larger.
Follow-up question from John, recognizing that the answer you provided, Emma, makes sense on a slope lot because of the exclusion of basements. You do see more massing, in particular on the south end, than you would on the north. Will there be proposed changes in these hillside lot areas? Emma or Nitu, did you want to tackle that?
The proposed changes in terms of massing for single-family homes mostly focuses on the RS1 zone. Those are typically larger size lots compared to the RS2 and RS3 zones, and so it may be easier to implement changes to address the scale of homes in the RS1 zone.
I would just add that one of the things that we are looking at as part of this work is whether or not the exceptions to floor area, residential gross floor area, are appropriate. And so one of the things that we have been putting our minds to a bit is whether or not we should be exempting the basement space from gross floor area or not. Part of the intention of exempting basements is that the impact of the massing of a basement on the street is not as high as it would be if you were looking at the space being constructed above grade. It's essentially hidden density, so we're not including all of it. But there is an opportunity to look at potentially including basements if that's something that council and the public wanted us to pursue. We're just reading the comments as they're coming in here, so if you catch a pause, we're trying to look at your feedback. Question, can we ban the use of CD zones in single-family residential zones? The CD zone is recognized as it's called a comprehensive development zone. Often it's a zone that recognizes the unique aspects of a proposal, the sort of unique aspects that don't naturally fit within our standard zone categories. And I will say, and the commenter is anonymous, but it is something that we're looking at, like within established neighborhoods where, say, you have a number of lots that are all similarly sized and similarly zoned. We have general reservations about creating CD zones within these established areas. But if you're in, for example, an area where the predominant zone category is, say, a multifamily residential zone, it's not uncommon that we would have a CD zone within that context. But within single family residential zones, generally staff are discouraging of creating CD zones. We do have a few files right now where someone is proposing a CD zone, and in those cases, the extent of the relief from, say, a parent zone like an RS1 zone, which is our 1-unit residential zone, the extent of the relief being sought is limited to, say, 1 zone standard. So it might be that they're a meter or 2 less than the minimum lot size that's required in the zone. In those cases, what we're trying to do is say that the CD zone is based on an RS1 zone, for example, with the exception of lot area being not met by the difference proposed. Nitu, are there any that you and Emma would like to take?
So somebody asked, is the enforcement of bylaws regarding secondary suites to be improved since the more secondary suites are being encouraged? So in response to that, most of the unregulated secondary suites were constructed before the current zoning bylaw was put in place. So enforcement mechanisms will still maintain the way they currently are. And to register a secondary suite, you have to go through the business license process. And in the future, we'll be looking into changes to that to ensure that we are regulating the number of secondary suites and their built form in the city.
We have one that's asking about, someone's asking, are there other areas inside the homes exempt from FAR calculations other than the basements? Yes, they are. The definitions, the definition of residential gross floor area captures that, and the excluded areas are cellars, crawl spaces, carport, garage, bay window, box window, or a bow window, elevator shaft, and any area occupied by stairs on the second story of your building. So you can find that in the current zoning bylaw in the definitions section.
Thanks, Neetu. There's a question, are encroachments on city property going to be included in the new bylaws? The short answer to that is no. The zoning only applies to the siting and construction of buildings and structures on private lands, so it wouldn't apply to encroachments within the boulevard, which is city land. That being said, if we had, and I guess keep in mind, it depends on what the encroachment is. If the encroachment is not a building or structure, then we have some limited control in regulating it through a zoning bylaw. So for example, you can't really, or you can't use a zoning bylaw to regulate something like plants and hedging and its proximity to a property line. So that's a bit of a limitation in the tool. Concern with the format for the engagement, I think just the difficulty being able to type in a comment or question in this sort of digital format. For the individual that wrote that, I would encourage you to, if you can, complete a feedback form, and if you can't, then by all means give us a call. We have our contact information on the Talk White Rock page. You can call me directly as well, 604-541-2142, and happy to kind of take your feedback for the record. There's some comments here, concerns about reducing environmental impact. I will say through staff's involvement with the Environmental Advisory Committee and some of the other directions that Council has provided to staff about supporting better opportunities for tree planting, we really felt that the landscaped open space standard that we're looking to introduce is really going to help provide some environmental benefit. And what we're seeing with a lot of the newer construction is not only do you get a larger home on a property that perhaps wasn't previously occupied by a home of the size of the new one, we're also seeing a lot of concrete and asphalt going in on the property and leaving very little space for permeable lands to allow for water to infiltrate into the ground or for tree planting and other plantings to occur. So staff are quite excited about the potential of introducing a minimum landscaped open space standard in the bylaws so that we see less hardened surfaces on the ground and more opportunities for green space and plantings. Neetu or Emma, is there any that you want to tackle? There's a couple of questions that relate to setbacks. Emma, did you want to speak to our evaluation of setbacks? It is something that we have been looking at, is whether or not we could increase the yard setbacks, so the distance that a building or structure would have to be from a property line.
Yeah, so we did look at the difference between reducing FAR and versus reducing setbacks in residential zones, and we found that reducing FAR had a greater impact on the massing of the buildings. Similar with FAR in the RS2 and RS3 zones, increasing setbacks in those areas wouldn't really be feasible given how narrow and small those lots are. So that's sort of why we landed on reducing FAR as opposed to setbacks, but it's definitely something we can still look into. In terms of the green space in reference to setbacks, we are looking to enhance the amount of green space in residential zones by incorporating the minimum landscaping standards. So we're hoping that will be a way that we can improve tree retention and enhance green space in the RS zones.
Thanks, Emma. There's a couple questions about controlling the amount of vegetation that's growing around sightlines on corners, and it's very valid comment. It is something that we're not able to control through zoning. So again, we're not able to use a zoning bylaw to control how people might program their corner. What I will say though is with any new development that requires a rezoning, or say a development permit or development variance permit, we are looking at requiring a corner cut. So we would typically take a 3x3 meter or a 5x5 meter cut of the corner, and that is then transferred to the city, and that allows the city to then take ownership of the maintenance of that corner. So that there are some recent applications where we've taken a corner cut and there's a large hedge that goes to the edge of the corner, creating sightline issues. And so one of the things that the city would be pursuing then is the removal of that hedge, or the cutting it back so that sightlines are maintained around the corner. So certainly a good observation. Question about what sort of calculations would be used for a lot being subdivided into 2 lots. I'm not overly clear on the question, and I guess just generally when we're looking at the subdivision of a lot into 2 lots, we always look at whether or not there's a need for rezoning. So if the lot is large enough to accommodate a subdivision while maintaining the minimum requirements, say for lot area, frontage, of the zone that exists, then that's something that can be pursued. If it would create a situation where the post subdivision lots do not meet the current standards, and typically we would have a rezoning application that precedes the proposed subdivision. Okay, well, those are great questions, and as they come in, we'll continue to go through them. I would suggest maybe we'll wait for a couple minutes and see if we get some additional questions, and then if we don't, and I need to, I think it'd be good to roll through the presentation again. So if you want to get it queued up, and then we can go through it.
So we'll just go over the presentation briefly again in the event we have anyone new attending at this time. So as previously mentioned, this is just a brief outline of the direction we are planning to take moving forward. After today's session, we plan on potentially hosting additional engagement sessions for the zoning bylaw review. Our decision to move forward will largely be based on responses from the feedback forms from today's open house. At this time, we have made available the link to the feedback form, which is located on the zoning section of the Talk White Rock page. So the first topic for the presentation are accessory uses. This includes secondary suites, home occupation, bed and breakfast, coach houses, and short-term rentals. Staff identified 5 key reasons for changes to accessory secondary suite standards. The first 2 changes was to provide more freedom for homeowners who want to rent out spaces in their home and providing them with an additional income to support monthly mortgage payments. This will also contribute to improving the affordability of housing. Secondly, to allow for more secondary suites to support the rental housing market. Also to support multi-generational living and aging in place by providing rental accommodation for seniors wanting to downsize and for people wishing to rent out spaces in their home to family members. And lastly is to align the zoning bylaw with changes made to the BC Building Code in 2019, which expand permissions for secondary suites. So the city is now looking to allow secondary suites more broadly as per the following draft changes to the zoning bylaw. The proposed draft amendments for secondary suites, as I mentioned previously, largely align with updates to the BC Building Code. For example, secondary suites would now be permitted in duplexes, triplexes, and townhouses. Also, the current standards restrict the size of secondary suites to 90 square meters, but the proposed standards limit the suite to 40% of the size of the principal building. So this is to ensure that the secondary suite still remains smaller than the principal building. Other topics in the accessory uses section include home occupation, bed and breakfasts, short-term rentals, and coach houses. Home occupation was a topic of interest for staff because of changes to working patterns throughout, as I mentioned, the COVID-19 pandemic. We saw an increase in applications for home-based businesses and in some cases for more than one in a home. The draft changes proposed seek to allow more than one business in a home, whereas the current zoning standards restricts it to one business per household. A standard is added to enable a home business within a secondary suite and requires the operator of the business to be a primary resident of the suite. Coming to bed and breakfasts, the draft changes are related to simplifying language and removing any reference to standards which are addressed in other municipal processes within the city, like the business license process. A standard has been introduced to ensure that the operator of the bed and breakfast is either the owner or immediate family member of the home and is a full-time resident of the home. This ensures that the operator has ties to the local community and maintains the traditional use of the bed and breakfast. With short-term rentals and coach houses, no additional standards have been proposed. Staff reviewed standards in other municipalities in the Metro Vancouver area, and the current standards in the zoning bylaw largely align with the standards in neighboring municipalities. Some provisions for short-term rentals and coach houses are proposed to be removed as they're already accounted for in other municipal processes in the city. The second key issue identified was around amenity space requirements, as currently the zoning bylaw has no standards.
Me too.
Yep.
Sorry to interrupt, just on the topic of secondary suites, I had published just very unintentionally, I published a comment and just wanted to acknowledge the comment. There was a question about whether or not the city has the infrastructure capacity to support the introduction of a bunch of new suites. And so just as it relates to secondary suites, just want to acknowledge the comment and say that generally I've looked at this in past practice when we were introducing secondary suite permissions at the City of Kingston and working very closely with the city's Utilities Commission, and there wasn't a great uptake or impact on the city's infrastructure to support the suites, often because you compare it to having, say, a bathroom in the basement or rec space like a wet bar in the basement potentially. That being said, I will take that comment back, and as part of our next steps, we can consult with our colleagues a little further in the engineering department just to see if they have any concerns with the potential introduction of a number of new secondary suites through broader zoning permissions. So thanks for that comment. Thanks, me too. Sorry to interrupt.
No, thanks, Greg. So as I mentioned, the second key issue identified was around amenity space requirements. Currently, the zoning bylaw has no standards which require amenity spaces in multi-unit residential buildings like apartments and townhouses. So amenity spaces are recreational areas provided in multi-unit residential buildings like apartments and townhouses. These areas can either be indoors or outdoors, open to all residents of a building, or restricted to a specific unit for residents to use. Amenities like communal swimming pools, meeting rooms and dining rooms, which are indoors and outdoors, are available to residents, and they're called as common indoor amenity spaces. Outdoor common amenity spaces could include community gardens or recreational spaces like a swimming pool, which are open to anyone in the building and is situated outside. Lastly, outdoor private amenity space could include landscaped areas, patios or decks, which are reserved for the use of someone in a specific residential unit. So one of the key reasons why staff incorporated these draft amendments is due to the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic again, and because of the value that people place on access to nearby amenities. So these draft amendments seek to improve the livability of new apartment developments by incorporating outdoor common and indoor common amenity areas to encourage social connection and a sense of community. Similarly, in townhouse developments, outdoor common amenities and private outdoor amenity areas ensure residents have private outdoor areas for children and families to use. Another key amendment that is proposed is the exclusion of indoor common amenity spaces from the calculation of gross floor area in secure rental tenure developments. This would ensure that secure rental tenure buildings do not have to sacrifice rental units for amenity in exchange for amenity space. So the draft amendments for this section would apply to apartment buildings with 10 or more dwelling units at a supply rate of 6 square meters per dwelling unit. And as per point 1B and C on the slide, if outdoor common or indoor common amenity areas are provided, it must be available to all residents and have no dimension less than 6 meters and be designed so that the length does not exceed 4 times the width. These design standards would ensure that the amenity space is functional and can reasonably accommodate recreational activities. I'll now pass it on to Emma, who's going to discuss our next topic, which is landscaped open space.
Thanks, Neetu. Draft standards for landscaped open space can encourage many community benefits, such as encouraging the natural filtration of water through the ground, which reduces surface water pollution. This would be accomplished by requiring landscaping with permeable materials like live plant material. Other key reasons include tree retention, beautifying the streetscape, and encouraging the use, again, of live plant material for the provision of wildlife.
Hey, Emma.
Yep.
We have a question that I thought you could speak to on this one. It asks, will the bylaw limits that we're looking at right now as it relates to landscaped open space prescribe or set a total percentage or a maximum percentage of impermeable surface?
Yes, so draft standards would have a maximum percentage of the lot which could be covered by impermeable materials. So for example, in the RS1 zone, and we'll get into an example in a few slides, in the RS1 zone, the maximum amount of impermeable materials would be, say, 70%, and then the rest of the lot, 30%, would have to be permeable materials. So that's definitely something that we're looking to integrate into all of the different zones in White Rock. So landscaped open space standards typically place a restriction on the amount of a lot which can be covered by hard surfaces like grouted stone or concrete. Impermeable means water cannot penetrate into the underlying soil, and permeable would mean that constructed surfaces and live plant material allow water to penetrate directly into the ground. So we did scenario testing to ensure that people would be reasonably capable of attaining landscaped open space standards. So we drew out all the impermeable surfaces on a lot to see how much space could be reasonably dedicated to open permeable surfaces. In this case, for the RS1 zone, there's roughly 35% of the property which could be open for landscape areas. And this aligns with the draft standard, which I just spoke to, which would require that a minimum of 30% of the lot is covered with permeable material. And then similar to the previous slide that I just showed, this is showing a lot in the RS2 zone. And considering all the hard surfaces that could be integrated onto this lot, like a building, a shed, your driveway, you would have roughly 29% of the lot, which could be open for landscape materials, which aligns with the draft standard, which would require a minimum 20% of permeable surfaces. And as you could see with both of these examples, there's still some leeway to integrate other impermeable elements on the property that we may not be taking account for, so that the standards can be reasonably attained for new housing developments. Okay, so this is an example of a model showing the impacts of the landscaped open space standards. So here we have an RS1 zone lot. In the video, the model represents proposed landscaping standards on the left, and the model on the right represents no landscaping standards or the status quo. Some key things to note are that the side yard area and the front porch have incorporated river rock, which is an example of a permeable material for the proposed landscaping standard model. The no landscaping standards model has pavement in the side yard area and the front walkway, and a large grouted stone patio in the backyard. These are all non-permeable elements. So a property owner now could potentially pave over their entire lot with concrete or asphalt. And with the new proposed standards, this would not be permitted on an RS1 zoned lot, and you would need a minimum 30% of the lot, which would have to be landscaped with permeable materials. Okay, so now I'm going to discuss our next topic, which is the scale of housing in single-family home zones. Staff focused on this topic as part of Council's strategic priority to review single-family home areas. So some of the key reasons as to why these reductions in the scale of residential housing are being explored include concerns over what residents call the monster home dilemma, whereby newer housing development does not suit community character, and this can be addressed by reducing floor area ratio, otherwise known as FAR. We will also be discussing density bonuses, which can be provided for energy efficient building design and for accessory dwelling units like secondary suites and coach houses to support the rental housing market. So the majority of areas in White Rock are known as mature neighborhood in the official community plan. These areas are characterized by low-scale residential development like single-family home zones, duplexes, and triplexes. When discussing draft amendments for single-family home zones, these are the areas that we're referring to. So it's the mature neighborhood area, which is marked as gray on the upper portion of the map. So engagement sessions for the development of the 2017 official community plan indicated that many in the community felt as though the character of new housing development doesn't suit existing development in the city of White Rock. One resident noted that we need to define the character of housing to be built, that there are too many monster homes. Another mentioned that the loss of neighborhood character from monster houses and that monster homes don't fit neighborhood character. And this is a trend that we saw in engagement summary reports for the 2017 OCP engagement sessions. So an approach to reduce the scale of single-family homes is through reductions to FAR. FAR, or floor area ratio, is the ratio of a building's total floor area relative to the size of a lot. So for example, if you have a 500 square meter lot and the FAR is 0.5, then you could build a 250 square meter home. Certain areas in the home, though, are not included in the calculation of FAR, such as basements, garages, carports, crawl spaces. So you could accommodate a home that is actually much larger than 250 square meters on a property of this size, if you accounted for all the space not included in the calculation of FAR. So the first alternative approach to addressing FAR is the scaled approach, which is used in West Vancouver for all of their single-family home zones. So in this approach, if your lot is greater than 677 square meters, then the FAR could be 0.35. If the lot is mid-sized and between 474 and 677 square meters, then the total size of the home is set at 237 square meters or 2,551 square feet. And then if the lot is smaller and is less than 474 square meters, the FAR would remain at 0.5. So this draft standard would be most impactful in the RS1 zone, which currently has an FAR of 0.5. Majority of lots in the RS1 zone are more than 677 square meters, as seen in this table. So a total of 1,243 lots could have their FAR reduced from 0.5 to 0.35. And then reducing the FAR in this RS1 zone from 0.5 to 0.35 would result in a home that is at least 30% smaller for lots larger than 677 square meters. And as you can see in the table near the bottom of the slide, the impacts of reducing FAR on a lot that is around 700 square meters or 7,534 square feet would result in a home that is 30% smaller, so 1,130 square feet smaller if your FAR was reduced from 0.5 to 0.35. Okay, this scenario was created based on the provisions of an RS1 zone, and both models consist of a lot size of 677 square meters. The models also take into consideration zoning provisions like minimum setback requirements, max floor area, and maximum lot coverage. The model on the left here is labeled has an FAR of 0.5, and the model on the right, which is labeled, has an FAR of 0.35. The proposed FAR reduction model at 0.35 represents a smaller building, which looks more modest in scale compared to the existing FAR model with 0.5 FAR here on the right. Scenario illustrates a reduced building depth, which may be more visually appealing for neighboring properties, but you could also reduce building width, which could be incorporated for the 0.35 FAR model to have a more slimmer looking building from the street. Something else to consider if we were to reduce floor area in residential homes is the impacts on the rental housing market. FAR bonuses could be provided for secondary suites and coach houses to reduce the impacts of reducing floor area on the rental housing market. So for example, a 0.05 FAR bonus for up to 500 square feet could be provided for the construction of a registered secondary suite. A 0.1 FAR bonus up to 800 square feet could be provided for homeowners who wish to construct a coach house. The image on the slide here depicts the impacts of a 500 square foot bonus for a secondary suite. The orange area below the back deck shows the space that would be provided for the registered secondary suite as a bonus. So floor area calculations currently also don't include portions of a garage or balcony, covered deck, or porch. Draft amendments propose to include portions of floor area in the garage above 450 square feet in the calculation of FAR, which is roughly the space needed to accommodate a 2-car garage. So in this circumstance, garages that are larger than those that would accommodate a 2-car area would be included in your FAR calculation. Also, portions of balconies, porches, and covered decks could be included in FAR. We've also received complaints from people who have noticed that unenclosed balconies are being enclosed illegally after building permits have been issued to add floor area to their homes. So this could be addressed by automatically including any covered deck, balcony, or porch which exceeds 10% the size of the home in the calculation of FAR. And this is an approach taken by numerous other municipalities in Metro Vancouver. Okay, this is another model showing the impacts of the massing that covered balconies and decks can add to a building. So in the model here, you see on the left, this is showing a house with a covered deck. And then the other model is showing the impacts of not having the deck covered with the extension of the roof over top. So including portions of a covered deck in the calculation of FAR could really reduce the massing of the building, and including any portions of the deck beyond that size could enhance the streetscape and reduce the size of homes. So similar to FAR bonuses for accessory dwelling units like secondary suites, we could also provide bonuses for implementation of the various levels of the BC Energy Step Code, which would incentivize green building. And this would be particularly impactful for residential homes, as green building standards have multiple benefits like reducing your monthly energy costs, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and improving energy efficiency. Usually implementing green building methods involves thicker insulation and reduces the livable space in a home. So including a bonus for FAR for implementing the Energy Step Code could account for this and incentivize the use of it in White Rock. So for example, in New Westminster, residents can get a 0.01 FAR bonus to meet Energy Step Code 3. They can get a 0.03 FAR bonus to meet Energy Step Code 4 and 0.05 Energy Step Code FAR bonus if they meet Energy Step Code 5. Further to the topics that we discussed today, other topics included in the bylaw review include electric vehicle charging, building height in the waterfront village area, multi-unit residential parking, off-street loading, and short-term bicycle parking. Okay, Okay, I see that we have additional questions that were sent to us. So Greg, I'll pass it off to you to facilitate the Q&A session again.
Sure, thanks, Emma. So I'm just going to publish a few of the comments that aren't really asking a question, but I do want to make sure we acknowledge them. So just a question, I find it difficult to understand, or a comment, I find it difficult to understand why zonings have been knocked down in the OCP when we are and will continue to be in a housing crunch. So there's changes seem to be political. Live in White Rock, why not plan for the future? The future is more people, we need more housing, not less. So thanks for the comment. There's a comment here about zoning should be looking at applying itself to the regulation of electrical and telecom TV lines, so putting them underground. We do have a bylaw that requires the undergrounding of what would otherwise be overhead wires. So again, it's sort of about finding the best legal tool to regulate certain activities. And so we do have a separate bylaw that allows us to require that through new development, hydro lines are put underground. There's concern about amenity areas with COVID have been closed and not accessible, and so they add costs to maintain and can become outdated over time. So the preference would be no amenities, lower priced units and smaller units, and then encouraging people to get out and spend their amenity time outdoors and socializing. So thanks for the comment. We are finding in our research that in a lot of cases, I mean, White Rock's a bit unique, perhaps, that we're quite lucky to have access to a lot of good public open spaces, but in a lot of other contexts, someone may not have access, or they maybe have mobility challenges and don't have access to what would otherwise be communal outdoor amenity spaces. So we do want to see if we can push to have amenity spaces included in new development. I would also say, and Emma, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the exemptions that we've applied within the calculation of floor area, so gross floor area within, say, a multifamily building, is we've established an exemption for any common indoor amenity space. So we wouldn't want someone to not provide common indoor amenity space because it would come at the loss of floor area. And that has been the context of, or part of, ongoing discussions. So we are looking at ensuring that a developer can still make a reasonable return and not sort of compromise with not providing amenity space. I'm not sure if I need to, or Emma, you want to take any of them? I'm happy to keep going through them as well.
Yeah, so we just got a question. Are you suggesting relaxing the floor space if someone adds a secondary suite? There needs to be reductions in new house sizes. In terms of density bonuses for secondary suites and coach houses, this would be accompanied with reductions in FAR. So say if we reduced FAR in the RS1 zone from 0.5 to 0.35, then we would provide a very small increase in FAR to accommodate for the size of a secondary suite or coach house. So for example, West Vancouver has a 500 square foot bonus for secondary suites and then 800 square foot bonus for coach houses. So we wouldn't be looking to maintain current FAR standards and then provide more space for accessory dwelling units.
I would also add that a lot of the times a secondary suite will be proposed in a basement, for which we've already offered an exemption from gross residential floor area. So there is some opportunity to continue to accommodate suites without taking away from density that would otherwise go to the principal unit. I'm just going to publish some general comments that I don't know are asking for a response. Just concerned about the approach that the city is taking in respect to the zoning. I'm not sure if there's more to that comment. FAR is too small for secondary suites. Don't add the garage into FAR. We need more floor area. Look at the stats. Again, if there's something specific that we can take away and research further and evaluate as we've done this, I think some of the modeling that you were presented with tonight does illustrate some of the scenario testing that we're doing to see are the draft standards that we're presenting going to have a meaningful impact on the ground or not. There was some reference to FAR being a confusing measure altogether, and perhaps we should just rely on setting minimum setbacks. So 25 feet from the front, 25 feet from the back, and 5 from the sides, and then perhaps adding a max height on top of that would be a better way of controlling the massing than this measure of floor area ratio, which can be confusing to a lot of people. So thanks for that feedback. It's certainly that actually has been a good topic of internal discussion about should we just be measuring and setting standards that define the building box. A comment, this is not really a question, but I feel that all covered areas, including carports, garages, decks, and balconies, need to be included in FAR, not setting a limit of 10% or a certain size threshold, but all covered spaces. And we have received feedback from members of the community about the concern with once you have an overhang over top of a balcony, then over time it can be closed in and we end up with essentially a 3-season room that is very much an extension of the building. So thanks for that feedback. Neetu or Emma, did you want to, Jordan, tackle any of these? Comment, please define reasonable profit for developers. Since when was this a city responsibility? I'm just going to leave that one. There's support for looking at floor area ratio bonus for higher BC energy efficiencies. Comment that FAR bonuses are used by those who want to get around zoning regulations, which provide stability for all. Just on that last comment, I think there is value in looking at where you're giving a density bonus. So some of the things that we're presenting are bonuses for secondary suites is something that some other municipalities are doing in addition to bonuses for higher levels of energy efficiency. So it may be that the building box doesn't change, but that we get a better product for the community. Okay, I'm seeing just some support for some of the other comments that have been provided. So did you want to just reiterate, Emma or Neetu, kind of the next steps and how people can continue to be engaged and offer feedback moving forward? I guess you have it on the screen there that you have a feedback form on the Talk White Rock page. If people weren't able to compile all their thoughts and comments today, please fill out a form. Was there anything else that you wanted to share, Neetu or Emma, in terms of next steps?
Additionally, if anyone's finding it difficult to access the Talk White Rock page, they can also find it if they go to the city's events calendar. And we've got the feedback form tied to today's date, October 27th. And if you go and press the link, it leads to a description of the event. And at the end, you will see a link to the feedback form, which you can access to provide comments. And alternatively, if you're unable to access the feedback form, you can reach us through the email or the contact information provided in the Talk White Rock page. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We will stay here for another 5 or 10 minutes. And if there are any other questions that come to mind, please let us know. And otherwise, just want to thank everyone for their time tonight. Concern that FAR bonuses defeat the whole monster home problem in White Rock. The point that I want to make sure is clear that I think is important as we move this forward, it's a comment that my colleague Emma had made, is that one of the things that we're looking at is a reduction in floor area ratio for primarily the RS1 zone. And so it would be taking the current 0.5 max FAR. So you get essentially 50% of the area of the lot to build out as floor area. We may across the board reduce that to 0.35 and then give opportunities to bump it up closer to what we currently have through things that would ideally benefit the community, and what those things are worthy of further discussion. So, but if we were adding FAR bonuses on top of current permissions, then that might defeat the purpose as you're mentioning. One of the questions we wanted to throw out there, and I believe it's incorporated into the feedback form, is whether or not any of these particular topics are of special interest to you or of greater interest to you than others. If we could get some feedback on the changes that you are most and least supportive of, that would be helpful as we present information to council in the future.
Greg, just to add on to your earlier point of what the next steps would look like. So we have the open house engagement session, which is happening right now as on today. And as Greg mentioned, we have an online feedback form, which you're welcome to fill out. It would give us an idea on how we can engage further with you to on specific topics, hopefully, to get more feedback on the approaches we should take moving ahead. Following which, once we've compiled all the comments and drafted up the bylaw, it would go to council for consideration for first and second reading, and council would then direct staff to conduct a public hearing, and then it will move to final approval of the bylaw and implementation. So that's just the next few steps moving forward.
Okay, well, I want to kind of wrap up and thank everyone again for your time tonight, and we're going to close the meeting, and it will be published to the city's YouTube page. So if you know of someone that wanted to attend and wasn't available, please let them know. There will be a recording on the YouTube page that they can watch, and please also check out the webpage. And thanks again.